shoes clean, because if I come home with dirty shoes, she's going to tell me off. And that is the day, and that is how small that event is, that you decide in your subconscious mind, which runs 97% of your reality. That is the day you decide that mummy's happiness or the primary carer's happiness is more important than your own. And that power goes from your solar plexus, and that is how you live your life. Always people pleasing, always making everybody else happy, and it comes from something as small and insignificant as your shoes. Or it could be, you run off in the park having a marvellous time, and then mummy smacks you when she finds you because she thinks she's lost you. And she's like, don't you run off again, you made mummy so frightened. And again, power back to the primary carer, And it can be the same if you were brought up and you had a nanny, in the fact that if you don't stay in what's called your luminous light body for the first 7 years of your life, you will take on the ancestral karma of your primary carers. And that could be a nanny if it was a nanny that you were close to and not a biological relative. So just setting those thoughts for how we lose our power, and then we spend the rest of our lifetimes trying to get our power back. And then with the entities, when I was seeing clients, from about 2006, I really didn't get many grey entities attached. Occasionally you would, but really not that many. And they really weren't that horrible, really, to be honest with you, because when I'm regressing people, obviously I'm establishing, is this someone who's had a physical body and been in physical incarnation that's attached to you, or are they actually a being that's not had a physical body and never incarnated into this planet? So I asked them where they're from. And in the beginning, when I was doing this work, I was really naive to it, so I had no preconceived idea of what was going to happen. It was just letting the client say what they said through them and what these beings were saying. And then I'd ask, are you in charge? And sometimes there'd be a kerfuffle in the background and someone more important would step forward and go, yes, what do you want? And I'd say, how have you attached to my client? So we'd hear the story, and sometimes it would be through operations. They'd say, well, they're vulnerable, through operations, or they don't really know how the cosmos and the universe works, so it's tacit consent. Naivety is a permission slip in this reality, and people don't really realise that, and that's why in general, apart from the little tiny window of time when I spoke about this on TV in general, you're not going to see the truth, because if you saw the truth, you'd all be taking your power back, and you wouldn't be giving your power away, and you'd know you could heal yourselves, and you would be empowered to find the origin. Because a great guy who I do love his work is someone called Dan Winter. I don't know if you're familiar with Dan Winter, some of you are nodding. I love Dan Winter's work, so do look up Dan Winter, because he's amazing. And he's been collaborating with another friend of mine, Elena Danan, who some of you might be familiar with. So I've done some interviews with Elena. And Dan is backing up really what we're all saying. We're all kind of backing each other up in some ways. But when you don't have your soul memory, you don't have, from my perspective, and also what Dan seems to say, is the coordinates to get out of this universe. If you don't have charge, which is life force energy, you are not going to have your soul memory. So when the mainstream is telling you, oh, this is woo-woo, or you're not meant to remember past lives, you are meant to know your soul coordinates of who you've been, where you've been, not in an egocentric point of view. It's not something you necessarily have to share with people, but it's a sense of who you are. It's reclaiming your power, reclaiming your divinity, so that you can get out of this dimension, whether it's round or flat. You can get out of this dimension of reality, because if you don't have enough electrical charge, you won't be able to die consciously, and your soul will get fragmented, as in it will end up as an entity, a bit attached to someone. In general, when entities attach, it's not the totality of that person's soul who's attached to them. Sometimes it's just a tiny fragment of their soul. And if they've been maybe a significant being in this planet, sometimes that soul does incarnate back and fragment because of the work that it's trying to do on this planet. But even that isn't necessarily fixed in my perception from what I've experienced so far. And then we're going into ancestral lifetimes. So we're looking at the story of your ancestors. So if you tell me you've got heart disease in your family, I want to see the ancestor who had their heart broken and hear the past life story of the ancestor and how it's got carried through the ancestral timeline, and the secrets and shame of the ancestors that have carried through the ancestral timeline. Because most disease is created by fear, guilt, shame, betrayal, resentment, and bitterness. And when all the cells in your body vibrate in a disharmonious frequency, you're going to get sick and ill. It's guaranteed. So when you start to work on the stories of your soul and heal your subconscious mind, you will heal your physical body. Often I work with people on eyesight, hearing. I don't bother working on eyesight and hearing. The byproduct of working on your emotional stories will mean that those things should organically start to improve. And even when I was doing the celebrities on TV, I think it was, some of you will know who Wayne Sleep was, the ballet dancer. Yeah, because even if I'm taking celebrities back to past lives for sort of more of a woo-woo fun, let's see if we've had a past life, I still need what's called an affect bridge, which is a reason to take them into a past life. So with him, it was to see, why has he had eyesight problems in this lifetime? And that went back to a past life. So it's going back to the origin of that. And even in the interview afterwards, he did say he felt his eyesight had improved. So, with private clients, you can work on a deeper level. People in the public eye are probably not going to necessarily want to admit what their health issues are. And the interesting thing with regressing celebrities was most people were willing to do this because they didn't think it was them. Somehow they thought whoever they were in this past life was absolutely nothing to do with who they are now. And in general, in a session that we were doing, which with private clients, it's 2 hours, but in the ones that I did on TV, they were 3-hour sessions, and they would maybe access 2 or 3 past lives. But by the time I went to a second series of Have I Been Here Before, we had a historian sat in the gallery with the producer, and I had talk back in my ear saying, the historian doesn't like this lifetime, can you move on? And of course, from a professional point of view, I can't move on because I need to care about the person's emotional and physical well-being. But from their perspective, they didn't like it because it wasn't written in the history books what was coming up, and so for them it was a false memory. But for me it was a true memory because it was going to help heal my client. And also what I started to find was the truth of history was written in your soul's Akashic records, not in the history books, as we know they're written by the winners of the war. So that was when I started to have an issue with the people from television, because they wouldn't let me take people back to the past lives in the way that I wanted to do it, which they did in the beginning because they were naive and they didn't realise, and maybe people hadn't spoken to them from further up to say, you've got to stop her doing this, this and this, and try to curtail it into what they wanted it to be. So you'd have those kinds of experiences happen as well. So I'm just weaving between all those things to just give you a sort of feeling for how it flows, and you're always taking people back to, in general, this might shock you, but on average, nobody has more. When you go to the last day of your lifetime and you're reviewing your life, nobody has more than 9 significant events. You may have had a lot of drama in this lifetime, but when it comes down to it, there'll probably be, on average, 9 significant events. Because when I'm taking people through the past lives, I'll say, go to the next significant event, the next significant event. And on average, it's 9 significant events that are the totality of your lifetime. And then I take you to the point where your soul leaves your body, and I ask you, what are your thoughts on this lifetime? Do you have any regrets? Do you, and then we have a very sort of spiritual, psychological chat about that lifetime. And we resolve that lifetime to the 0 point field. So when I say the 0 point field, I mean where we're emotionally neutral on that lifetime to the point where that life is cleared. Whatever afflictions you've got in this lifetime, and I did tell this story last week, if anybody's here from last week, but I love this story because it's the one about the man being pregnant in the past life. And in this lifetime, he'd had pains in his stomach when he got to 30 years of age, and he had no reason to understand why he'd got these pains, and nobody in the medical world could understand why he had these pains, but he's like, I have excruciating pains. So when I took him back to the origin of the pains, it went back to being 30 years of age in Eastern Europe in around the 1920s, 30s, and being a woman as a prostitute and having a miscarriage and losing the baby, and the emotional and physical trauma of the miscarriage had never properly been healed. So when he got to the same age in this lifetime, he manifested the pains, because that's kind of a form of deja vu. Either it's age-related, people-related, so you could meet somebody, say even here today, and it might trigger a past life memory between the two of you. Or you can come to a location anywhere in the world and it might trigger a memory, like, you might say, well, I never had any issue with heights, and then I went to Madeira, and all of a sudden I have this issue with flights and heights. And so can you see how all these things happen? And people think it's maybe to do with stress or anxiety, and it is stress and anxiety, but it's the stress and anxiety from the story running in your subconscious mind that is running your reality. And so, does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask?
Is there any relation to deja vu?
Yes, that's what I mentioned, deja vu. So deja vu is, some people would say it's a time slip. So you could either be accessing a past life, which could be one answer, or you could be having a time slip within reality in the holographic universe, perspective of it being a holographic universe. So it could be that you slipped into another timeline of reality. And that is also a good question, because that's how I ended up not working on TV anymore. I was on the BBC Big Question. I used to go on doing talking heads sometimes on reincarnation or esoteric matters, and I'd work on other shows as well, like Big Brother's Little Brother and all kinds of different little shows, the X Factor Extra and stuff like that back in the day. But then finally, I was on this BBC show, and out of my mouth, which I was brought on to talk about reincarnation, but they had this whole other subject about food, and at the time I was into raw food. And so they ended up talking about sugar tax, and out of my mouth came something about, well, you've got to look at who runs the world, and the Illuminati families run the world, and the drug and food industry, and I went, just carrying on a live show. And then I added in that it was a holographic universe as well. So then when they disagreed with me, I said, well, your reality exists and so does my reality, because it's a holographic universe. And then they denied that it was a holographic universe, but they actually had a science magazine from the BBC admitting that it was a holographic universe. But that, in a way, was the end of me working on the rest. Naive in my perception. I really didn't think, I just felt free-eyed, to say the truth. Because when I'd been on there the year before, I'd relived the witch trials of Salem, which had really taken me into a dark place to have to heal that from being sat on this BBC Big Question thing. So what happens is they just don't call you. No radio, no print, no TV. Nobody calls you, and nobody tells you why. And then over the years, I've met so many TV producers. I've even pitched shows in America. I've spoken to every single person at the main networks. They all loved it. They're like, wow, you should have your show in America, blah, blah, blah. And then they just disappear, because obviously somebody stops it. It's not allowed, So you learn these things over time. But I'm glad that I spoke the truth. And I think, that's all we can ever do, because by speaking the truth, you live your authentic life. And if you want to stay away from disease and illness, you need to live in your truth. Otherwise, you're going to get sick and ill. But you may, on that journey, learn discernment, and maybe when it's better to keep your mouth shut, which I had learned discernment, because when I was first on this morning, I somehow found a random blog online, and it had mentioned the editor, who I did like. She was a lovely lady, but one day she asked me what I thought about David Icke just at the beginning of all this, and because I'd seen this blog, I knew not to say that. Yeah, I actually quite agree with David Icke. I knew not to say that, because I thought this might not go too well. So I'd learnt discernment in that manner, but everything that we're learning is, about discernment, boundaries, all these metaphysical things that we know are going to help us to heal and evolve as a person, so that we can be, we want to be empathic, but we don't want to have our boundaries abused or taken advantage of. And let me just see if I've spoken. Oh yeah, the other thing I just wanted to mention is birthmarks. There was a great guy called Dr. Ian Stevenson who did autopsy reports with children in India. And because these children were freely allowed to talk about their past lives, they would talk about them. And they would even, say the name and the person they'd been before. And when they found the autopsy report, and it was always only the previous incarnation, it wasn't any further back, it wasn't like 3 incarnations ago, it was always the last incarnation. When those children had birthmarks, they would find on the autopsy reports that they were exactly the same point where there was either a knife wound or a gunshot wound on the person who they claimed to have been's body. So that's fascinating. And he did amazing research, Dr. Ian Stevenson. And sometimes we go between lives as well. And in the experience between lives is seeing these luminous beings, and everybody seems to see, if they're able to see them, these really beautiful, luminous beings that are very benevolent, but it really does depend on your vibration and your reality. And the reason I say that is I had a lady come to my house once for a session, and she arrived on the doorstep, and I opened the door and she went, "Your plant's dead outside." I thought, oh my God, she's going to be trouble. I was like, please let her be able to see a past life. This is going to be And so she went to the point where these benevolent beings were, and she starts going like this, and I said, what's happening? She said, oh, there's a very annoying man, get away. And having the gifts that I got, I knew it wasn't an entity, and I knew it was actually a being who loved her and trying to help her, but her consciousness was at a place where she wasn't even able to connect with benevolent beings who were trying to help her. And afterwards I got the message, well, you showed her a past life, but she's not ready to see the rest of it. And so I did actually learn a lot by that people who don't believe what you and I believe, they're not at the vibrational frequency for whatever reason, and we've seen that in the last 2 years with the myriad of beliefs of what people have and how they've come to that conclusion over the last 2 years. And we're all in our own little bubble of reality, but we're coexisting with this other bubble of reality that merges, that we're all collectively in this room today, but we're maybe not all having the same experience of this reality. And
is it true to say that the future lives, our future lives, affect us in the same way, similar ways, but of course we can't research them because they haven't happened yet?
Yeah, and the future lives are really within potential, which is a really good point, because when you go to psychics, not to diss conventional psychics, but they're telling you your future based on the vibration that you're at in that point when they speak to you. Should you go and do emotional inner journey work and heal something, your potential and probable reality for the future will change. And once I had a guy who was doing drugs. He was only young, he was about 20-ish, and I took him to 2 realities to give him an experience to maybe decide that these drugs are not such a good idea, because he wanted to fit it. Well, all my friends are doing the drugs. It's like, so in that experience I took him to a future reality in this lifetime, should he stay on the drugs that he was doing, and he was homeless, begging on the streets, and died quite young from drug addiction. And then I took him to another probable reality in this lifetime where he'd stopped doing the drugs and he'd met a beautiful woman and they were really happy and they lived a long life together. And that actually scared him enough that it was enough to get him to stop doing the drugs. So maybe a lot of people with addiction to drugs should be shown different probable realities of this lifetime, let alone past lives. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about point of death, where if you didn't have enough electrical charge, you couldn't go through and your soul would fragment. I've never heard that before. I was just wondering how you came to that realization.
It's just an intuitive. Well, I'm probably not the best person to explain it. People like Dan Winter explain it from a probably a quantum physics point of view of energy. I mean, in Buddhism, they say it takes 72 hours for your soul to leave your body. Quantum physics says it takes 72 hours for the electrical charge that makes you, because, you know, they said when they weigh your body, you weigh, what was it, there's a film even, so many grams, isn't it, that was based 23 grams, yeah, is what your soul weighs. So, you know, where that soul goes is really probably back into the reincarnation grid. You know, somebody said something to me the other week which did kind of, I thought, well, that's interesting, because they said, if you look at the multi-generational families who've got lots of money and keep that money multi-generationally, those beings that had those lower vibrational entities and energies attached to them, maybe they can't get out of this reality. Maybe this material world is all they've got. So, you know, the trinkets and the materialism to them are very important, because they don't have the coordinates or the vibration to go to other places in the cosmos, universe, or other dimensions. They're stuck here in a reincarnation grid, continually reincarnating here. That's just a thought, you know. I don't know the truth of that. That's just I thought, that would be interesting. That would make sense in some ways of why they've been able to keep amassing so much, because they don't go off to other places. They just stay here.
Exactly that. The other thing I was going to ask you is, what's your opinion on when we pass it over, either going towards the light or going towards the heart centre? Because there is something that's going to be trapped in.
There's people saying don't go to the light, go to the black hole kind of thing, which is the point of creation. So the black hole is where you can create more than the white light. So I did sort of change my stance on that a bit myself. So I did start saying just go towards the darkness. You know, my mum died last year and I did help her transition, and it was shocking. It wasn't a pleasant death. It wasn't, you know, what I was thinking with all my skills and gifts, this is going to be wonderful, it's going to be, you know, like just amazing, and it wasn't, because that person, my mum had dementia as well, and so you can have your skills and gifts, but that person has their free will, and as much as you can use your loving skills and gifts to try and guide that person, they have their own ability to want to die how they're going to die, and that might not necessarily be as loving as you hoped it to be. And yet I've had clients say to me, oh my God, thank you, you gave me so much knowledge and information to help me when my dad passed over, and it was beautiful, it was amazing. And I thought, oh, I hope mine will be like that when mine go, and it really wasn't. So, you know, it's just bearing that in mind, that, you know, if we were taught for ourselves and could teach our parents, you know, that would be helpful, but our parents don't always listen, so we can't always help them to have a conscious death, although I think if we can birth consciously and die consciously, we'd have a much better experience. You know, the birthing, you know, I mean, I can talk on so many subjects like conscious birthing, conscious conception, you know, not cutting the umbilical cord, lotus birth, that's where you, water birth. Lotus birth is where you, if anybody doesn't know what that is, that's where you keep the placenta attached to the umbilical cord, and then it naturally dries up in a few days of its own accord, and then that's you choosing to enter the universe when you choose. Otherwise, most of us shallow breathe because the umbilical cord was cut too soon. But I think now, in the UK anyway, I think they're letting it pulse for 45 minutes, or at least a few minutes longer, but 45 minutes is more or less what you really need, unless you did the lotus birth.
Yeah, I keep hearing that we all have a soul contract, and I understand so many things, but I just like, who and with where is the contract? How is it working?
Yeah, I mean, I have my debates about soul contracts. I think you can override your soul contract. You know, things could go so well in this lifetime that you go beyond your own potential. You know, because there can't be any limit in the universe. So, you know, what if you've stuck to the minutiae detail of your soul contract, then you can't go beyond that.
No, it's just because like while the last couple of years have happened, you know, like I could sort of try and stop people from harming themselves, put it that way, with what's been going on, and no matter how much I will, it's like stopping a train wreck.
Yeah.
And you get to that stage where no matter what you're going to say, their root.
That's their free will.
And so is it the free will or is it the soul contract speaking?
Well, it could be an entity, you know, influencing them as well. You know, that this is the only planet, as Phyllis Schlemmer wrote that book, The Only Planet of Choice. It's the only planet of choice. So you have this plethora of free will, you know, and the free will is to not get it, which is where the whole, I just mentioned my perspective on soulmates and twin flames. So soulmates are people you've known in other lifetimes, from my perception. You know, there can be this big cosmic, oh my God, you know, we're meant to be together, and then, you know, 6 weeks later it's like, I want to kill them. Because, you know, the past life stuff's come up, that you've been magnetic, you know, you're like magnets in the universe, so you're going to meet these people. You know, two people here, one friend who I asked to come, the other friend who said she was going to come, are both, look how big this room is. They sat next to each other. They don't know each other, but they sat next to each other. And that's vibration, you know, that's being drawn magnetically into vibration. So, you know, that could happen. That's what happens in relationships. You know, you've seen in the books where they talk about how you meet someone you've known in a past life. But your personality, which is really what's the totality of all your past lives, all your inner child stuff, all the ancestral stuff, will, if you haven't resolved that, will determine whether that relationship is successful and you can live a happy life till the day you die, you know, together, or whether it's going to be like guns at sunset every day because of your personality, even though you may believe this person is your twin flame, which is the whole other thing. Even if that person was your twin flame, if you don't get on and you can't work through that stuff, you're really not meant to suffer together. You know, it's better to suffer alone than put someone else through the suffering of your personality, or you putting yourself through the suffering of someone who's violent or abusive. But because you think you're spiritual, you're meant to stay in this relationship and be in an abusive relationship. No, and I think that's where a lot of this soulmates and twin flame thing gets a bit wonky, where people think they've got to stay in this relationship because they've decided this is a twin flame. And I think the twin flame concept comes from a soul monad group, if you've heard of what a soul monad group is. So that's the soul group that you've incarnated into this planet with, and there may be quite a few people. I don't think there's one twin flame, and the only person in the universe could be this one person, you know. I think you come in with a soul monad of that, and you may well come across those people. I've come across a few people who were in my soul monad. I met one particular person in Hawaii, and we had a relationship. And, you know, like lots of women, we say, I'd marry you and have children with you, except he went, oh, it's so stressful, because of his personality, you know, that he hadn't processed. And he said, oh, it's so stressful, I think I'd have a heart attack. You know, the thought of actually having to deal with his stuff. And, you know, 8 weeks later, he did have a heart attack and died. You know, so you know, I say it in a humorous way. It wasn't humorous at the time. But what I'm saying by that is there are people you are destined to meet. And what happens when you meet those people is your free will. You know, when I met him, initially I was like, not really interested in you. And then he opened a fridge door, and like the whole Akashic records of our lifetimes just opened up to me. And I rode in a car from one side of the island to the other for 3 hours, just crying. This is even before he died, with just like a Rolodeck of all the lifetimes we'd known each other in, but we'd never been able to be a proper couple. You know, one lifetime was just a glance. Other lifetimes we'd been brothers and sisters. You know, so many different concepts, but we'd never actually been able to incarnate as a couple. And here we were, on a beautiful island, you know, and everything had potential, but he had not dealt with his wounded inner child, you know, from childhood, and he hadn't dealt with his substance abuse issues, and the whole concept of, you know, having to man up. And actually, I think the biggest thing I'd said to him was, you know, if you want to be with me, I see your skills and gifts because you're amazingly gifted and talented in what you do, but you'd have to pay your own bills. I'm not going to pay for you, because when I met him, his ex-girlfriend was still paying his rent, which wasn't helping him. She would be controlling him. So she had lessons to learn about, although she was a wealthy spiritual lady, She had lessons to learn about, controlling men through money and finances. So we all have our stories and we all have our things we have to work on within ourselves, and we all have to at some point deal with grief and loss and terrible, terrible stories. I mean, I have heard so many terrible stories that people have shared with me. I mean, one, for example, a client said to me, "Oh, my dad died the same day as my baby brother." And I said, "Oh gosh, that's really unfortunate. How did that happen?" She said, "Well, my dad shot my baby brother dead, shot my sister, shot me, and then shot himself dead." And you're like, how are you now, a 40-year-old woman with children, and you have managed to navigate your ways through this level of trauma and grief? And, as a soul, you've chosen to incarnate into this family dynamic, knowing that this man is potentially mentally very unstable and this might be a huge challenge. And yet, you see people like that, and they're not alcoholics, they're not drug addicts, and they somehow found their way to negotiate through themselves, through the darkest shadow of this world that you can have. And I hear these stories all the time. I have friends who've dealt with the most horrific things. And if you find that spark of light and wisdom, which is your own authentic, multi-dimensional self, you will find the light inside of you. Maybe the black hole's out there, but the light's inside of you, to navigate your way in this physical body, in this vessel, in the most graceful, peaceful way you can. And the best way I found from my own journey of awakening and what happened to me was it's meditation, but it's not meditation into the middle of nowhere and oblivion. I found it's, if you don't want to go and see someone privately for sessions going inside, just start with a guided meditation. I happen to have my own, you wouldn't know it worked on keys back in the day. I happen to have my own meditation CD, which is 43 minutes. You can download it, but that's taking you through your chakras. I mean, this whole debate whether the chakras are artificial or not, but I think they are part of our energy system, and I think they have a valid point of going through your chakras and going inside yourself and releasing emotional trauma from each energy point in your body. And if you feel negativity, simple stuff like just imagining a trapdoor in your body and negative stuff coming out, whether it comes out as, mercury, bats, it doesn't matter, just treacle, just let that negativity out of your body. You've got the potential within you to heal everything. I broke my ankle back in 2019, both sides, and tore the ligaments, and they said if you don't do pins and plates you won't be able to walk. And I just said, with the greatest love and respect and honour for the work you do, I'll just do what I've done. And it was a non-union break, so they said it's not going to heal because it's not aligned, but as you can see, I can walk. The potential to heal is in you. I've healed myself of polycystic ovaries, I've healed myself of abnormal cells on my cervix. You need to go back to the origin of the trauma to heal things, but you can heal them. I've seen it with clients heal amazing things, just in one session, sometimes half an hour on Skype, because I work doing the emotional Akashic records, which is just weaving between the origin of the emotions to go to the origin of the trauma. And then in regression, you're going deeper into regression, into your subconscious mind to see a story. And if there is any sexual trauma that you have to resolve, and you're not necessarily aware of that, even though from an intuitive point of view I might pick that up, I would never share that with you, because I won't be planting any seeds of consciousness that you don't consciously already know about. And years ago I had the False Memory Association come to see me, and they were saying, "Oh, my daughter's saying this has happened to her and that's happened to her. And what do you think? What do you think?" And I said, well, it could be an entity. It might not even be her past life memory. It might not be this life memory. It might be a past life memory. So unless you're working with someone weaving in person into regression, in which you're not leading them in any way, they're leading themselves to the origin of their trauma. And if they access those memories, is very different than you saying in an intuitive reading to somebody who has zero awareness of abuse even though you can see, if you heal that, you might heal your body, because that might be the origin of the abuse and the trauma, which has made all the cells in your body vibrate in a disharmonious frequency, but you can't do that. And also in the UK, we have a 1939 Cancer Act, which bans us from talking about alternative cures for a reason, because, you know, the truth will set you free. So we're not allowed to say that to people. So should I end now, or does anyone have another question? Kerry?
Well, I actually do have a question, but I think you still have some time.
Okay.
But at any rate, I wanted to ask you, because you really focus on individuals and their individual stuff. Do you ever look at groups and look at group futures? In other words, because we are here on the planet at this time experiencing some momentous changes on the earth that involve large groups of people.
Yeah.
And plans for those people, like Illuminati plans for people. So I just wondered if you yourself looked at that and whether you ever share that.
Yeah, well, I was having I'm getting goosebumps now. I was having a conversation the other day with Elena Danan, and I said, I think Klaus Schwab's from Epsilon, there's this planet called Epsilon, and I said, but what do you think is going to happen? Do you think that all these, you know, world leaders are just going to die and be taken out, or do you think what I think, which is that their consciousness is just going to change over? So the physical vessel will still be here, but these dark, malevolent beings that were operating through them will be gone. So that will happen. But of course, you've still got the wounded inner child and the past lives of these world leaders that has not been resolved. But you've got those ancestral lineages of what they're incarnated into, you know, and it seems to be, you know, like I talked about, multi-generational, why these people keep the same, you know, it seems to be the people who went to this school, did this, you know, it's the same real group of people incarnating. However, it could be any of us in potential incarnating into that. Like, I have a client who, in this lifetime, he's a very successful businessman, but in a past life, he was our Prime Minister, Lloyd George. And he has a memory of being Lloyd George, and that would make sense to the level of him being a powerful businessman in this lifetime. However, I was thinking, oh, this is great, he's going to really evolve, you know, because he's so powerful, he'll be able to work in the background and be a really evolved being and bring in the consciousness. And then over the last 2 years, we had a massive disagreement about the last 2 years. And he's like, Andrea, you're insane, I've seen people are dying of this COVID, they're dying of it. And, you know, completely differing beliefs than me, but he didn't keep doing the inner journey work. And, you know, he didn't get to the core issues that maybe may have helped him to awaken further to be able to see the truth. And so I was trying to work out with influential people why they can't see the same truth I can see, you know, why they see it from a different perspective. And with him, I was like, why can he not see this? And he was like, my sister works in a hospital. So it's also the tribe, it's the, you know, it could be the family tribe, like, you know, I believe my sister, I believe my schooling, you know, these are my core friends, you know, my friends all believe this, and I need to belong to a group like a shoal of fish. You know, I'm not a lone wolf. Like me, in this lifetime, I'm a lone wolf. I don't need to belong to a group of people. I need to belong to my truth more than I need to belong to a group of people. And when you need to belong to a group of people, you'll only evolve to the level of consciousness of the group. And so perhaps, you know, with Kerry's question, perhaps going to boarding school does also make you want to be part of a group thing, because it tends to be people who went to boarding school who end up in politics predominantly. You know, they've been taken away from the primary carer at a very young age, so the heart chakra got shut down. So you see that as well. But not everybody who's been to boarding school is traumatized. You know, you can't, it's not across the board. But I've seen a lot of clients and I look at them and I go, you don't even need to say anything, and I'm already writing notes, boarding school. You know, I can see they've been to boarding school from how their vibration is, how their energy is, how it's affected them. But not every, you can't, the thing is nothing's cookie cutter. We are unique individuals, and some of us will fare well in that situation, but the vast majority won't. They'll shut their heart chakra down. But then would they have been better being at home with the parents? That's debatable, because those parents didn't necessarily have time for them. That's why they got sent to boarding school. That's why they're in that, cycle. It's, I've seen it with very, very successful clients that I've had. And they're like, oh, Andrea, I'd love to drive a Winnebago through Arizona in the desert. I'm like, well, you could. And they're like, oh, I'd love to have the time to be able to do that. But it's what they prioritise. It's, another very wealthy client, I said, have you been in your garden and done gardening? He was like, oh, no, I've never, I mean, I go in the garden, but I've never actually put my hands in the soil. I said, well, maybe you might enjoy putting your hands in the soil and doing that. And it's a perception of how we choose our time and our energy and what we feel is of value. And if you don't connect to the earth, they maybe don't spend as much time connecting to the earth, and they're in their head, they're not in their heart. And maybe some of them even think what they're doing is for the betterment of humanity, even though it's not. I can remember being in, I got given an award years ago for, I set up something called Earth Peace Meditation Day, and the byproduct of that, which is a funny story because I'm going to tell you that as well, was the good thing about it was I got to go into these meetings in the Houses of Parliament. So I find myself in these meeting rooms with various people giving talks and workshops. And one of them was Sadhguru. Some of you might be aware of who Sadhguru is. So I'm in this meeting with Sadhguru, and I'm saying, don't you think we should use the media for the upliftment of humanity, to empower people back to themselves? He's like, no, we'll have hippies and communes, you can't do that. And I thought, oh, you mean they won't be going to your retreat place, Tamil in India, with 100,000 followers that worship you every day? So you think that's the byproduct. So, it's our differing beliefs of how we perceive spirituality as well. To me, it's giving people back the power to heal and save themselves. And in the truest sense of guru, which in Sanskrit is the signpost leading to the light, like all signposts, once you know the way, you don't need the signpost or the guru. And so, in truth, I've always said about the work that I do, if I'm doing my work properly, I should be out of a job with that client, because they will have found their own power, their own way back to their own divinity.
Somebody told me the time.
1 o'clock.
Okay, so I think we're on the right schedule, yeah? 1 o'clock, and then you have lunch for 1 hour now, and then we start up again